Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another book review on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today the book we're taking a look at is Italian Partisan Weapons in World War II. This was actually written in Italian by one of the co-authors, Gianluigi Usai. I apologize if I didn't pronounce that right. Italian's not my language. And then translated into English by Ralph Riccio. Now, you might recognize Mr. Riccio from a previous book we've taken a look at, his book on Italian small arms of World War I and World War II, which I quite liked. So he is something of an expert in Italian small arms, speaks Italian fluently, has written extensively, books, magazines, other publications, and so this was a book that had been published in Italy that he translated and was republished in the United States. And the title's kind of obvious, but the way that this book is set up, it actually spends, it's like 280 pages, and about the first 100 pages is background information and analysis and context, I would say. Things like discussing a brief background of the partisan movement in Italy during World War II, because it's certainly not super well understood in the United States, I think. And one thing they make clear is this isn't intended to be a detailed book about the Italian resistance. This is intended to be a supplement to the books that are out there on the Italian resistance, because, like I've seen with other resistance movements, the books that are out there on the history don't really tend to talk about the guns much. And so for someone who's interested in firearms history, that kind of leaves this big open blank hole of, well, okay, we understand the historical events and what was happening and where, but what guns were they using? Where did the guns come from? How did, this is an interesting element of the history that isn't well covered. And that's what Usai covered in Italian, and then Riccio translated into English with, together with him. So the beginning does have some basic general history about the Italian resistance movement, and then it's going to go into things like, where documented sources came from. A lot of this book is taken from documents in the Italian archives, archival communiques between different partisan groups, because there's a lot of information to be gained there on, when these groups are talking about guns. We have ammunition for this, but we don't have the guns. Can we trade you this ammo for that ammo? Or we heard you captured these guns. Can you send a couple of these over? Or in some cases, interesting things like, hey, we have a Moss 38 submachine gun, but we have no magazines for it. Can you send us a magazine so that we can reproduce it and make a bunch more magazines for it? That sort of information. And then also discussion about how these were used, what different guns, how the guns were seen by the resistance. The iconic gun of the Italian resistance is the Sten Mark II. There's some interesting question as to why, and they talk about that in here, and how the resistance looked at submachine guns compared to light or heavy machine guns, compared to rifles, pistols. To me, this is the most interesting part of the book, this first about 100 pages. There are a bunch of reproductions of communiques in there, and every single one of them is translated completely into English, which is very helpful, obviously, for those of us who don't speak Italian. Then the remaining, like, 2/3 of the book are a series of profiles of all of the different firearms that were used by the Italian resistance. And this is everything from handguns to heavy machine guns, up to from early pinfire revolvers up to Breda Safat 50 caliber belt-fed heavy machine guns. That sounds really cool, but to me, that's kind of the less interesting part of the book, because these profiles are very short. We're talking about 1 or 2 pages each, because there's a ton of them. The Italian resistance had this incredible smorgasbord of different guns that they were using, as many resistance movements do. But in this case, we're talking about guns, Italian military firearms, obviously, German firearms captured or surrendered by Germans, and then you've got things like, Austro-Hungarian stuff from the Balkans that's been floating around since World War I, guns from Russia that were captured by Italian troops fighting in Russia for the Germans, who then came back to Italy with PPSHs and SVTs and, all sorts of Russian firearms. And there's enough of them that in order to crowd them all into one book, the information is pretty brief. And if you have a good familiarity with World War I and World War II firearms, you probably already know more than what's actually written in the back half of this book about those individual guns. However, what that section also has are pictures. There are a lot of photographs in here, archival pictures of Italian resistance fighters and units. And it's really pretty cool to look at these and see this whole smorgasbord of different guns. It's one thing to read archival notes of, this group had some, model 1942 Italian machine guns, and they had some 3844s, and they had a TZ45, and then they had a French MAS 38, and this and that and the other, and some Sten guns and a Thompson, and that's one thing. But to see actual pictures of a group of 12 guys that have 9 different kinds of gun between them is neat. It's cool. I really like seeing those pictures. And the back half of this book, every single gun that they talk about, that they reference as being used by the resistance, they actually have a picture of it with resistance members. So it's not that I would suspect it to be speculative anyway, but it's very much from speculative. It is photographically documented in every single case. And so that's really cool. Overall, it's definitely another niche sort of book. If you're not interested in the Italian resistance, you're not really going to care about this. You're not going to find much information in here about Italian military firearms just by themselves that isn't available more extensively in other books. What you find here is their specific application to the partisans and the resistance movement. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, it's a very cool book to have. It's one that it took me a little bit by surprise actually to find. It's been published for a couple of years now, but not really advertised anywhere that I've seen. So I stumbled across it going through Schiffer's catalog. Schiffer is the publisher here in the US. They sell it for $40. You might be able to find it on Amazon a bit cheaper. I will include links both to Amazon and also to Schiffer's page on it on their website. So if it's on Amazon for more than $40, don't buy it. That's the cover price. Schiffer will have it for that. So a pretty cool book. If you're into the Italian resistance, something you'll definitely be interested in reading. Thanks for watching.